Hello guys.
Hey, how's it going?
Cool. How are you?
Doing pretty good.
We'll wait for 2 more minutes. So, Bill, is this your first time to join this meeting?
Hi, yeah, it is. I'm just probably going to lurk today. Just interested in kind of following the open telemetry community and seeing what's going on, particularly with the JavaScript pieces of it.
Awesome. Great, welcome.
Thanks.
And do you work for which company, if you don't mind?
Yeah, I work for Intuit right now.
Okay, great.
Hi guys.
Hello. I think we have another new member, I guess. Leanne? I don't know if I'm pronouncing right.
It's Elon with Datadog. I was mostly just gonna lurk and listen. I hadn't really been following the JS tracers as much, so just wanted to kind of noticed it was on calendar. Figured I'd listen in on and kind of see where things are at, what y'all are working on.
Great, welcome again. By any chance, do you work with the Rock?
Yeah, I mean Rock's on our engineering team. I'm on our product team.
I see. Okay. He was pretty much involved at initial stage.
Yep.
Looks like he's busy right now with some other task.
Yeah, exactly. He's still interested in following from afar, and like I said, I'm mostly going to be a lurker. I just kind of popping my head in around a few OT meetings to get back up to speed.
Great. So if you guys can write your name into the agenda doc, that would be great. Do you guys have a link for the agenda or the notes? Cool, I see that. I think we should get started now. So the first item on the notes is, so yesterday I released another version of the library, which is 0.1.0. So that is because there was some issue with the earlier version and had to release the new version with the fix. The one good thing is someone from, I think Microsoft, they're using this library. They're building their own SDKs and they open the issues on our repo regarding the earlier version. So I immediately fixed the issue and did the new release. So now everything looks to be stable and stable in the sense in terms of alpha release. Cool, I think that's all it's there. The next item is, this one is, I added this item. So we have a script to generate the API docs, but we are not hosting these docs anywhere. So I was thinking, do you guys know any way to host these docs, or do you guys have any preference in this?
Is there a standard way? I'm happy to volunteer. I thought about that already, but I'm not sure what's if there. I looked around for some time for some hosted solutions of API docs, but couldn't find something that is
So
reliable.
I can
Can we use
there's-
the GitHub pages simply for that? Or
Yes, I think I did this once. I think I can try this again. There is just some implications with the URL and all of that. So that, but let's try that.
So I think open tracing they are hosting somewhere in their own domain. I don't know how they did it, but I imagine we can do something like that. I'll share the link about the open tracing API hosting, so you'll get some ideas there. So, Bart, if you host on the GitHub pages, will this render as a like normal HTML page, or you can see the source code and all?
I mean, it depends whether you want to expose the privates or not. Like, because you can by default the code is exposed. I mean the public, but if you want, you can also expose for the GitHub pages also the privates as well.
I see. But as an end user, I'll be able to see the plain HTML pages, right?
Yes.
Okay. So Daniel, do you want to take this action item on you?
Yeah, I take this. I just remembered that I did this a few months back for something else. I can take this again with GitHub pages. Yeah.
Great, great.
I mean, last time I configured something like this was like 2 years ago, and because then it's simply working. You commit, and then everything is published automatically.
Yeah, the only thing you have to do is you have to set some config variables so that for dot files so that it gets rendered properly and does not use the GitHub render like get GitHub template and stuff. I get this done.
And this APIs will get updated on every pull request, or how do you want to configure?
This is something we have to then, that's the next, like one thing is generating them. The other thing is automating the generation of it. I can look into how to integrate that with our build system.
Do we want to do it like whenever we actually cut a release rather than it being like whatever it's on master? Do you think having like version docs would be difficult?
Yeah, that's also a good point, I think. Yeah, I can actually have for that. What do you think, Daniel?
It's a good point of Brandon. So then the solution would be to just add another yarn script. And when we release, just run it once before we release, so that then the docs are always current with the latest release. I think that's what you're saying, Brandon.
Yeah.
So as a GitHub pages, we don't have to check in the code as such, right?
No.
Okay.
But let me find a workflow that works in this flawless.
Sure. And same kind of question that we discussed last time. This is about benchmarking. So I think we haven't still decided when do we want to run the benchmarking and how do we want to publish the numbers. Last time, one option was on every release, we can run this benchmarking numbers and then publish with the release package. Do you guys have anything on mind regarding this?
So I think we stopped. How did we stop last time? So I think the idea was to somehow that. So my point was that we need some kind of history to either automate it or just manually. So that's the only thing to see regressions. But we could theoretically. Why don't we take the? I propose a pragmatic approach to just run them, not automated, but at least for every release to see regressions, and also running them like everyone can, I guess, run them on their own to see. Or
But maybe the benchmark should be run with every PR, because then we might notice that something, happened drastically with the performance. Because of some PR, and not until we release something, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. Even I was little confused in that way. So let's say if you run benchmarking before the release, then we might skip, or we might face the issue during the release actually. Then we need to go back again and then kind of fix whatever issue, whatever stuff we added. If we do at every merge, probably we can find out the issue at that time only.
I mean, now whatever you, whenever you push something, you see already a metrics about the unit tests, like whether they are going up or down. So maybe we might have exactly the same performance if that is possible. So that would be really nice to see. Okay, my PR just broke something or speed up things.
I think what we ended up last time was just a little bit of the two things. First, without storing the results of the previous or the current, or you have to at least compare it with the last release. So we have to somehow log the last release, like performance data, and then at least compare it manually with every merge. And the second thing was, I think, where we thought about that this might slow down our build process even more, because the merging is already pretty slow. And there, I think Ted came into play where he said he wanted to see how he can bump our release our CI instances in a way. I think that was the last thing we ended up with. Is correct?
I think so. Yeah, you're bang on.
But benchmarking can be also run without blocking the merging, right? It can be done just an info. So even if it's running, I don't know, half an hour, it won't be blocking anything.
But where does it then end up? The numbers, where do they end up in the end?
I don't know, just, thinking loudly.
Can we publish that numbers on GitHub pages somewhere?
Let me just, so I see the requirement. I have a few people at Dynatrace that I can ask about that, and I just take that.
Okay, that would be awesome. I think to start with, the benchmarking currently takes less than a minute or two. So I believe we can run with every merge or every pull request, and then eventually we can automate to run during release and all kind of stuff. I don't know. That's what I was thinking.
Yeah, I think that sounds reasonable to start.
What's the last thing you said? I was just describing.
So I said right now benchmarking doesn't take more than a minute or two. Again, it's depending on the number of samples. Right now I configure 10 samples. If you do 100 samples, then it might take 4 to 5 minutes. So just to start with, if we do 10 samples and if you run every pull request, just to see how things are running, is it really helpful, how it's really solving performance issues and all kind of stuff. And then eventually after might be V3 or V4, like alpha release, we can kind of move around, like doing the release or doing some manual stuff, or anything like that.
Okay, so the goal is to automate that.
Yeah, if you can get some resources to do this now, that would be awesome. But if
I
you
will.
have confusion, then we can go with something like this.
Yep. Okay.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Daniel. The next agenda is pretty much, I think this is more about the pull request and then issues that got opened last week. I don't know whether you guys want to talk about this or talk something else. I didn't have anything else in the agenda today, so just added few pull requests.
I was just wondering about the name traces, but I also commented on the PR. The basic tracer and the node tracer are basically pretty much the same as far as I see. So I was just wondering if there maybe inheritance would be better to avoid redundancy. That's my only point I had with that.
Daniel, did you get a chance to see like my version of the PR?
I also, yeah, I was confused about, there are two versions, right? So, yeah.
Oh yeah. With my approach, I didn't end up doing inheritance because essentially you have two different configurations, like the node configuration and basic tracer configuration. And in the event you have any sort of plugin loading, like I don't think you want to accidentally do it twice. I could pull up the PR, but
that was yours.
Yeah.
So your PR looks good, Brandon. Only, I mean, I was a little confused about the specs and then some of the things in the PR. So I just thought I'll put some things together and see if that makes sense.
I mean, for what it's worth, I like your singleton instance stuff. It looks really good. I think that some of the caveats, or I guess some of the, like the weird things that sort of came up was like, if you're doing, say, the node tracer, or I guess just like sort of reiterate what my PR does, right? Like we have a tracer factory, and because we're currently like not really supporting like name tracers yet at the SDK level, I just have the tracer factories return like the same underlying tracer instance for everything. But so one of the interesting questions that I sort of thought of that I don't really know the answer to is, in the event that get tracer starts like doing get or creates, and we try to create a new tracer for like, we create a new tracer for say node, like do we end up like repatching all the libraries or like all the plugin libraries that we have?
That's actually a good point. I was confused in that stuff as well.
Yeah, that's kind of like, I feel like the single tracer right now sort of punts on all those questions, but
no, actually, before we talk about that, the first thing is, I believe as per the specs, the name, the tracer factory should be singleton instance.
okay.
And all your tracer should get attached to the factory. So in your PR, what I see is you need to create factory every single time when you want to create new tracer.
No, so I think, so that was just like, I was sort of going for like this like global factory type thing, but yeah, theoretically it should be like a singleton.
The one use case I understood is if I have to stop all my tracers, so using the factory, I have control over kind of stopping or shutdowning all the tracers.
Yeah, totally.
That's when I got confused with your PR. Otherwise, everything looks good.
Cool. Yeah. I didn't know that the singleton thing was like a requirement, but I also never bothered to implement the like actual map of tracers internally either. But yeah.
Yeah. So think that's what I did in my PR. I have one tracer factory that contains the map of your name and version plus the tracer.
Cool.
So when you put some name to your tracer, you have associate tracer instance with that.
Cool.
For example, Redis will have its own tracer, MongoDB will have its own tracer, something like that.
Okay, cool. Yeah, I feel like I should probably throw this into an issue because I was looking at some of our like internal Lightstep code, and there are some locations where like traditionally with the open tracing model, what you do is you sort of create a single tracer and unit it as like a global tracer. And so like all of your packages sort of use the exact same tracer at runtime. But there are some scenarios in our code base that I was looking at where like we actually create a completely separate tracer with like a completely different configuration for like a specific package, where rather than that package using like opentracing.get global tracer, instead like when you initialize the package, you pass in a custom tracer to it. And I think that like if you have the singleton tracer factory, it sort of prevents you from doing that because everything sort of points back to the same place. And I think if we do the tracer factory, part of the constructor for that is going to have to be your configuration object that gets shared between tracers.
Makes
So
sense.
maybe there's a thing where there's like a third optional parameter in get tracers where you can pass like a tracer configuration object. Not entirely sure.
Yeah, I think that's also not clear. So if I want to configure, let's say, Redis tracer, and with that few attributes or few options, right now there's no way to configure the tracer with customized attributes.
Yeah.
Or even let's say for HTTP, let's say I have two HTTP instance running. One, I want to use BT format as a propagator. Other, I want to use, let's say, trace context. Currently, that's also not yet available with the tracer factory.
Yeah.
So that's again one confusion point. The other issue that you mentioned is with the node tracer, we are loading everything when you initiate the object. If you get node tracer multiple times, how do you gonna handle all kind of scenarios?
Yeah. I think there's like, in terms of just like other changes that need to happen, I think that like our plugin object, rather than having like, because if I recall correctly, like all of our plugins objects sort of inherit from the same plugin class, and that one has like a sort of a private tracer attached to it that you can access. And I think we'd have to move away, like all of that would have to change as well and go to like tracer factory.get tracer.
And then every plugin will put their own name for the get tracer instance.
Yeah, I believe so. Because I've seen a pattern right now where like all of the various plugins like include a component tag and use that.
I see. We do have that tag, but we don't use as such.
Yeah, it turns out the tracer factor ended up being like a really big change as I was doing it.
Yeah, that's true. And another confusion for me was, if you remember last time Ted joined the meeting and he said, for few applications or users, we want to put minimum code into their application to start tracing and collecting the metrics, like 1 or 2 lines of code. If you go with this tracer factory, I'm not really sure how are we going to achieve that.
Yeah, I mean, so yesterday I was chatting with Bart and a few other folks that were working on the Ruby library, and they sort of brought up the same thing where like in the examples that they're writing with the tracer factory, there's like 10 to 12 lines of code that they're just constantly like writing and rewriting over.
Yeah,
so yeah, it's not exactly ideal. I mean, like, I think one of the things I was sort of thinking about is if like the requirement for the tracer factory is being able to like explicitly attach a name to your tracer, like I still don't understand why it necessarily has to be a factory as opposed to it being a method on the tracer that like tracer.withName that returns like a tracer wrapper of sorts. I think that's like, to me, feels like a cleaner solution, and we don't end up with like a a new object that has direct configuration, but it's also unclear like how closely we have to follow the specifications, like letter of the law, or if we can like do things that follow it in spirit, but it's slightly different.
I see. So how do you want to move this forward?
I don't know. I mean, like we have the tracer factory code written, and like I think with a few changes, one of the PRs could go in like pretty soon. But I think the question is like, how do other people feel about it? Like Daniel, Bart, like how are you guys feeling about the tracer factory?
I'm still not I'm not sure if this maybe is a Javaism. What I can do is trying to figure out how this factory idea was born, because if I remember completely correctly, this is more or less a Dynatrace topic. So it's driven by Wolfgang, and I have to reproduce why we are doing that. I honestly don't know right now.
Yeah, I mean, I remember it's my understanding that the intentional spirit of it, right, was like, let's say you write an instrumentation plugin for MySQL. It'd be cool to know that your instrumentation or like your spans are coming from a specific instrumentation library. So you can kind of suss apart like which spans are coming from where.
Yeah,
like,
that's completely clear. So
yeah.
the idea behind this is completely clear, because we know as Dynatrace, we want to sometimes just switch off some kind of instrumentation, some tracer, because we know there is a bug in this given version of this of this library. That makes completely sense. But how the explicit or the instrumentation itself is done, if it's a factory or not, so why this was specified this way, I'm not sure about that. And this is something we can find out.
Mm-hmm.
Because maybe it's just, there are reasons, maybe just in Java, who knows?
I mean, for what it's worth, like, yeah, it does. I mean, the factory like isn't exactly a Rubyism either. So, because I feel like I never see factories in JavaScript these days. I see factory functions of sorts, but not like an actual factory object. And
yeah, I mean, those patterns are very, of course, loved in pure OOP languages like Java, but yeah, I also don't see why this can't be just a property on this object that I can just set some way. So I will let someone explain that to me.
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I did go down the route of attaching like a function to the tracer, like with name. I never posted that PR because in the thread with, I think, Dylan, he gave a little bit of pushback for like going with the specification. I figured I'd do that, but I can sort of post that so y'all can see what that sort of approach looks like. I think it's much cleaner, but again, I think it's a question of like, how closely do we want to follow the specification? Because yeah, I think we accomplished it. No, sorry.
Sorry, or if you have to be a little bit like more open in the specification. I rather have this not break the specification, but change the spec to be more language agnostic, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think another point is we are targeting this name tracer for V3, I believe. And we still have enough time, I believe, to tackle this problem. For V2, we have some bunch of other items. So,
yeah, do you think we can go through the V2 list after this, or point 2?
Sure. And meantime, we can work with this name tracer as well.
What do we do with these 2 PRs now?
I guess let them hang out for a couple of days while we hear back from Wolfgang.
Okay, but they are like two ways to do it, right? Or
Yeah, I mean, for what it's worth, I feel like what I can do since my code or since my PR like actually has all the example changes and test changes, I can sort of like merge in mayors to get the singleton stuff and all that jazz.
Mhm.
That sound good?
And so do you want to merge your PR, or you'll just merge my changes and then we'll discuss on your PR later on?
Yeah, I'll like merge your changes into my PR, and then that PR can be like the thing that goes into master since it has all the example changes.
But do you want to put in the master as well? I was thinking once you merge my changes, we can keep that PR open for some discussions, and then we'll check with other people.
Cool. Yeah, sounds good.
Eventually, once we have clarity, we can merge that time.
Cool. Sounds good.
Good. Daniel, do you want to open the milestone for the V2?
I always struggle to there.
Yeah, I know it's somewhere hidden inside.
Here we go.
So the first one is Prometheus exporter. Do you have anything from your side, Daniel, for this?
Oh, I wrote to you on Gitter. I will finish that up this week. There is still, I think the metrics pipeline is still not specified, but I moved along and just do what Open Census does.
Okay.
And yeah, I'm good with
using the metrics proto, right? Okay. So the next one, I have PR open for the metrics SDK. I tried to do it only for the gauges and counter for now. Just wanted to see if everything, just wanted to see end-to-end pipeline working for the gauges and counter. Those are pretty much simple. So I believe you guys already approved that PR.
Yep.
I feel that it would be great if we just merge it because it will also help my exporter use case.
One thing missing there is I still don't have the record function there.
Okay.
I do generate the time series, but the metric descriptor and then final record is still not there. Because I'm also not sure how it's going to come into the picture. So I did this stuff. So do you guys want to really merge this and then work on the record and then metric descriptor and all kind of stuff?
I feel it doesn't hurt.
Okay.
Yeah. I think you will merge it, right? Then afterwards.
I can do that, and then later on I'll open another PR with the record and then other functionality. And with the help of your exporter, I hope everything should fit into the picture, and then we can just record and export the counts and gauges. Okay. Next one is name tracer. I think I added as a V2 milestone, but I'm not 100% sure whether this is V2.
Ted?
It is, I think, V2. I believe that's what we said. Though I do want to flag this as a new feature. This and separating out context propagation. This is actually what I hopped on the call to talk about. They're like, up till now, the spec changes have all been related to merging open tracing and open census together. And with splitting out context propagation and name tracers, we're now adding like new concepts. I think these are the only new concepts we're going to add. But it means when it comes to implementing these things, I fully expect there to be like issues and questions that come out of like trying to get this in here in a way that the other spec changes aren't going to bring up as much. So I don't know that I would want to block a 0.2 release if there is like some real blockage in Node.js around how this actually was going to get implemented. So I don't know if that makes sense, but. We've added this to the spec in 0.2. So if you're saying you're matching 0.2, you should have named tracers, but I'm noting that like the Ruby SIG and maybe other SIGs are a little bit confused about what they should actually be putting in here.
Mhm.
So I would say give it a shot and try to get something in there. But if you feel like it's really confusing, maybe we could have a discussion about punting this to a 0.3.
So we have actually two prototype on this, but there are a lot of things confusing about this feature. So that's what we discussed a few minutes back. I don't know whether you were there.
I just popped in for half of that after just leaving the Ruby SIG where they were having the exact same conversation. So I think, and yeah, this just feels to me like something that's experimental now, and like certainly in open tracing, we had to like, it was never enough to just write something in the spec. We always, when we tried to implement it, like a new set of like issues would show up, and we would have to like work through those before like the spec work would actually be complete. And so I kind of expect name tracers to be in the same boat as that. It's probably appropriate to release like a prototype version of this and be like, we're still in alpha phase. Here's what we've got so far. Name tracers are experimental. That's sort of what I would suggest.
I see. So, Brandon, do you want to discuss with this TED? Might be offline. I don't know whether we want to repeat everything again.
Yeah, we can talk about that offline.
Yeah. Thanks.
Because we spend around 10 to 15 minutes on that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Don't
because-
rehash it, but don't feel like you have to just do what the spec says right now. I guess that's like my 2 cents.
Okay.
Sick, yeah. Ken, I feel like you also didn't make it to the mutation sync yesterday, and we also had a very similar discussion. So,
Yep.
Cool.
Cool. The next one is Postgres plugin. Again, I'm not sure whether this is V2, but it's always good to have. And the PR is almost there. I think 90% work is already done by the mark. If you can merge that, it's good to have actually, I think. The next one is getting started guide. I think this is essential for the V2 now. What do you guys think?
Yes.
I think it would be great to have at least a minimal getting started guide, right? People should have something.
We do have examples, but this getting started is like really the naive way of explaining the things.
So Daniel will be back early next week from his honeymoon, and I think he said he would take that one.
Okay.
And
So
it's also a good learning for him because he's new on this topic, but knowledgeable on this field. So would make sense.
Okay. So the current deadline for the V2 is 28th of this month. It's like 2 weeks from now.
Yeah, he should do that.
Okay. And then I'm confident about the metrics SDK. I think it will be there. And Daniel, you said Prometheus it will be there this week.
Yeah.
Okay. The last one is there's some test failing in between. I think I'll take it that, and I don't think that's a kind of blocker for anything. Do you guys have anything else for the V2 now? Apart
What
from
was your take on the Postgres plugin again? I did not hear that.
I think as per the specs, this is not mentioned as like this is part of V2 and all, but Mark did really.
I got it. I just I wrote it down in the docs.
Right.
In the script. Yeah.
So Mark, what I was saying, Mark did an awesome job. So it's always good to include into V2 so that we can run some experiment around it.
I mean, the document load should also be out of the door. So not sure if this should be a part of V2 or not, but
the started guide you're saying?
no, plugin for document load.
Oh yeah, that's true. So sorry for that. I didn't like triage all those issues. I'll do it today again. I'll try to include it into the V2. I think that's all. I think for the V2 milestone. If you guys have anything, feel free to tag into this milestone. Do you want to go back to the notes, Daniel, again?
So I had an issue around context propagation if there's no other agenda items.
Sure, the other stuffs are issues and all. I think we can go ahead with the context propagation.
Sweet. So besides name tracers, the two remaining things that have to get worked out in the spec are separating out context propagation, if we're actually going to pull that off, and global initialization. I think the global initialization stuff isn't too big a deal, but like name tracers, context propagation being pulled out is like a pretty big change. And I have a high level RFC kind of describing what that would look like, but there's two sort of sticking points where I think it actually gets tricky. One is around the new name tracers stuff, because that means you no longer have, it becomes harder to, if you're going to compose injecting a bunch of different kinds of contexts, but now you have like what kind of injection you would want to do on a particular endpoint is dependent upon which name tracer you have, and the name tracer is kind of like a handle you're holding on to. That makes that a little bit trickier. I'm sure we can sort it out, but it seems like this concept of what component you're in relates to sort of your context, not just the tracer or the metrics. So that's a sticking point. The other sticking point is context switching. Right now, context switching, if, for example, you're moving your work from one thread to another, I don't know that that matters for JS, but you know, certainly if you have some kind of context manager, up till now, that's been tied to the span, and like setting a span is active. And now if we're going to move work from one thread to another, it's sort of like we want to move the whole context. And so it's moving a bit away from like how you would do that can't just be span specific, essentially. This might be a non-issue for JavaScript, but those are the two places where I don't have a straight answer right now for this context propagation proposal. So I kind of wanted to raise this in all the SIGs because it would be great to get more eyes on this change. And I suspect we'll need to actually be kind of spiking this stuff in actual code in order to sort out the answers. So over the next couple of weeks, I'm going to try to wrangle a working group together to really kind of dig into this stuff.
Okay, so for the first one, along with the name tracer, what I heard is with the name and version, you can provide the context propagation also, which context propagation to use.
That's sort of what I anticipate, right? If you're going to say like, okay, so for this particular endpoint, I want to disable tracing and thus disable context propagation. So I don't want to inject anything into this endpoint. You can see the same thing being true for baggage, right? You want to say, hey, for this library, client library over here, don't propagate baggage because that's talking to some external service. So you can see how this like name tracer or name metrics concept might also apply to baggage. It's something that it seems like it makes composing these like injectors a difficult issue. I don't want to like spend a huge amount of time on this SIG call necessarily, like getting into the details, so I'm happy to. But I would like encourage people to look at that proposal and like think about how that's going to work with name tracers, where you just say inject everything into these headers, and that inject call knows, well, my tracer, hey, you inject your thing. Hey, correlation context, inject that thing. Baggage context, inject that thing. And the fact that what context, what the tracer would want to inject is now dependent on having a handle to a specific tracer, kind of makes that more complicated. Sorry if that's a rambling explanation, but that's the issue I'm currently trying to chew on.
Sure. So we can go through this RFCs and then we can comment on those.
Yeah. Because I anticipate this being a big change, just like with the name tracers, I don't want this to like blindside the different SIGs when it gets accepted. So I'd love to get more eyes and more thought on this change.
Sure. And we have like 4 to 5 plugins. So I think a lot of things will change at that side as well.
Yeah, it'll be a big change. If it turns out like this is just too monumental, I don't want to delay open telemetry, and we may just have to give up on separating out context propagation. That would be sad if that happens, but I think if we're going to like pull this off, we'll need to have a lot of like eyes and attention paid to this over the next month.
Okay, sure. And I'll ping this PR to the Gitter as well. So those who didn't join today, they can also comment on this.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next agenda item was issues and all. Do you guys want to talk on that, or it's better to take offline?
Dave's not here, right?
Yes.
Okay.
So for the first one, Bart, I think you opened this issue regarding the separating the transport layer for the Zipkin exporter for the web and node.
Yeah, because the idea was just to be able, for example, to use the Zipkin in the web. And the only issue I see is the transport layer, which is the XML HTTP request.
Mm-hmm.
So if we could replace that to do the same as it was with other stuff that we share between Node and web, then we could be able to use it in the web.
And do you want to do this for other exporter as well, or only with the Zipkin?
I'm not sure about others, because the others for the Jaeger, it's working differently. But if we could have exactly the same, then we could share the exporters between web and Node, which I think should be fine. But there was also discussion that there would be another separation connected with agents, right?
Yeah.
So I'm not sure if that would be still relevant for that, or even though we have the agent, we still need some exporter.
So I think in production with the web, I expect people to use agent and then collector to get their traces and metrics into the backend. And if you just want to do this for the examples and then initial prototype or the basic use case, then I would say Zipkin makes sense. We don't have to really change the eager exporter for the web. Do you agree on this, or what do you think?
Yeah, I mean currently now I'm still unable to see the spans from the web, right, in an easy way. It's not. We're not there yet. We have just this console exporter, which was added by, I think, Daniel. And then that's it, right? But with the Zipkin, you could easily see how they really look into the tracing graphs and stuff like this.
But do we already? So how do you start the trace? You will hard code it somewhere in JavaScript, right?
Yeah, I mean, now I added the document load. So basically you create a web tracer and then start auto instrumenting on document load with a few other metrics. And then I basically needed some way of exporting them. So I created a exported, but it turned out there is already one. So I just merged it with this one. But still, you can only see those spands in a console, but how they really look on the graphs from the web, you don't know yet.
Is this not normally handled by, so I'm just wondering how this is done somewhere else. Or do we know Dave Raffensperger's take? I'm just wondering if the exporter should sit in the web. The approaches I know are more like having some JavaScript Ajax beacon that is sent back to somewhere. So I was always thinking that the web solution would somehow need the collector to send the stuff there, and it gets exported then from the collector. I'm just curious about that.
For the open census web, we don't have any exporter as such. What we do is we have agent configured there, which will convert your traces and it will send it to the collector, either I think using HTTP format.
That's what I was thinking. That's what Dynatrace RAM does as well. So we have some JavaScript just like thingy that sends the data like in a very compressed format just to some collector.
Yeah, and then collector will send it to any backend. That was
exactly,
the choice here, but I think this is more like for the testing and then seeing if everything is working properly and all.
But do we have already such collector that I could use for the web to see how the data is being sent or not yet?
Collector
how far is the collector, Ted?
Collector is already released. One version is already released for the collector. And I think they are working on the performance and all kind of stuff.
Okay.
But we need to build the agent then in our library. That agent will do the translation from our traces to the collector one, and then only things will start flowing.
Okay, so my understanding was that the exporter will do this. So basically, the exporter will be like a collector and send a. But yeah, then I see this differently. So we'll have collector, and then we are missing the agent. Is that correct?
Yes, and if you want to see the reference code, it's there in the Open Census web repo. There's a separate package for the Open Census agent, I believe, which will just do the one-to-one conversion. So I'm curious to know about this Zipkin use case. Is it mainly for your testing purpose, or do you really want to use in production like that?
I don't know, to be honest. As I thought, my understanding was that the exporter will be needed for the collecting the data and sending this somewhere.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think as far as I know, I think Jaeger uses Rift, right? So for Zipkin, it might work. For Jaeger, I guess it would not be a solution that is viable. I don't know. I haven't seen it yet in the browser, to be honest. So all solutions I know use some kind of low like Ajax that points to something on the back end. But I'm not saying it's impossible. I'm just saying I haven't seen it yet, ever like that.
I see. Is it kind of fairly easy to add the transport layer for the web and node if you have to modify the Zipkin exporter?
I mean, the way I see this would be basically to get the Zipkin spans, convert them, and I don't know, use simple Ajax requests to send them to some backend, and that's it. At least this is my understanding.
So in that case, you don't have to modify the Zipkin exporter, right?
I mean, well, the Zipkin exporter is using the HTTP from, it's using requests from Node.js for sending, right?
Mm-hmm.
So we need to replace that then with the XML HTTP request for the web if we want to use it. But then if you are saying that for that you have the collector and then the agent, which would be basically converting response into some format, packet and then sending, then I don't know, maybe it would be better to focus on this agent.
I mean, there are things like the whole batching stuff and all of that. I don't think that this whole exporter idea works so well in the web still. You just want to send off each and every trace more or less when it happens, asynchronously just load it off to some backend and be done with it. So that would be my idea of a ideal implementation instead of having like the browser, because you always basically, I don't know, export how many spans are right now, or do you export right now, or would you export right now with one request?
I mean, for the document load, I mean, so just to get some metrics about how fast the page was loaded, it's like 7 spans.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Can you open that link, Daniel? This is the link for the web agent.
Come on.
So this is that middleware between the web library and then collector. It just do one-to-one mapping.
Mm-hmm. And this sends it off to the collector with this XHR.
Yes.
So in this sense, the collector is some kind of web service, some backend. Is that correct?
It exposes some endpoint that takes in spans.
Okay.
I'll put the link for the collector as well.
So let's say if today I was to build such agent and I would like to see the span somewhere finally, how would I do this then? Which collector should I use?
Can you repeat your question again?
So let's say if I were today build the agent so I can finally export the spans, I mean convert them to some format and send somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
Where should I send them to see them on the page and to see some nice looking graphs and stuff like this?
So I believe in the collector you can configure whichever exporter you want to use. I am not sure whether they have included the Zipkin and Eager. I can take a look and then I'll come with you.
Exporter, let's see what they have.
Looks like they already have the Zipkin, Eager, and Prometheus.
Hey, they even have a Prometheus exporter. I have to look at that one. Yeah, they have Jaeger, Zipkin.
Yeah, and if you go a little down in the README, you can see the workflow. Daniel, do you mind to open that?
I'm on the README right now, right? You mean that one?
The top README.
Which one?
I'm
now on the exporter.
Outside the exporter. If you go outside the exporter.
Yeah, okay.
And if you go a little bit down.
Yeah.
Yeah, it looks something like this. So if you see this, there is some open census agent in place that will forward all the traces and metrics to the collector, and then collector will send it to the exporters. Does this make sense, Bart?
Yeah, I think yes, but so my understanding was that we can skip the agent and collector and send directly to the Eager because we are defining the exporter directly, right?
That's true for the node, I believe. For the web,
it's exactly the same.
I know, but I'm not sure whether we want to go with that route.
Okay.
I mean, what do you think? I mean, it's kind of open question.
I think there are reasons, because also you might not want to expose your Jaeger endpoints to the web, what you would need to do basically when you go that route. So exporter is like a DMZ way that you can in theory you can put this exporter into some DMC, this collector into some DMC, send the data off to it, and be sure that it won't it won't break anything. And you could still, if we think about this setup, we could still use a collector and still export directly from Node, I guess, to the same zip key instance, because through the trace ID, this should still be correlated. So this is something that should work actually. So I think.
So now I'm even more confused, because the web is using the basic tracer, right? And the basic tracer expects you to give the span processor and exporter. There's no any collector agent or anything like this.
So I think this agent is one of the flavor of the exporter, if you see in that terms. So the actually implements the same interface as other exporters, but it will not directly export to any backend. It will export to the collector.
Okay, then it makes sense. Yeah, so it
it
will be like I don't know, exporter collector.
It's a generic exporter, more or less.
Yeah.
And if you see the name as well, name in the Open Census web, it's called exporter OC agent. So it's kind of exporter only, but it's middleware, you can say.
Yeah. Okay.
So then you can again use the same sort of interface from the basic tracer to attach OC agent or OT agent exporter with the help of span processor. And then you are ultimately sending your data to the OC agent, and OC agent will hook into the OC collector.
Okay.
Does it answer your question, or this is still confusion?
Yeah, I mean, I wonder then if for other people it will be a bit confused too, because I mean, if you open the web and you would see, okay, I need to create the exporter, and then you see, okay, exporter Jaeger, you would think, okay, I might use this one, right? So I don't know, maybe we should change the namespace for that, not just call it exporter, but then collector, and just simply blocked for the web to use the exporter directly, because it might be confusing.
I see. What do you think, Daniel?
It was not just about the naming, or I did not fully understand the last.
I mean, now the basic tracer is shared between web and Node. And for Node, you use the basic tracer, you create a span processor, and you choose either Zipkin or Jaeger exporter, right? Or a console exporter. So you have exactly the same for the web. That's why my first idea was, okay, let's change the transporter for the Zipkin, because we'll be able to use it directly in the web. But now, if we will use the basic basic tracer for the web, which also expects for you to use the exporter, you might be confused which exporter you really to use and why it's called exporter. If in fact for the web you should use some agent which will collect the information and send to the collector.
True that. So, I was just thinking about one more thing that might seem like make it more clear. What we need in open telemetry anyways is also a collector exporter, right? So
yes.
Yeah, so that's the one thing that is right now missing anyways. But for the web, we need it, and we are the only group that has it because we are the only thing that runs on the browser.
No, I actually this collector exporter is required for the node as well.
Yeah, yeah, of course. But we are the only ones that have to deal with that with the browser side, after all.
Yeah, it's kind of urgency for us because it's required for the web.
Yeah.
But so what I understood or what I know is, even for the node, the main, I mean, what we advocate is to use the collector instead of plain exporter directly. I mean, you can still use the Zipkin, but the ideal way we can say is use the OC, I mean, agent, then collector, and then backend. Because with that, you get a lot of flexibility on the fly, or at runtime, you can configure. Let's say you can change from the Zipkin to Eager, from Eager to something else. And the collector has a bunch of other smart decision-making stuff.
Yeah, it's now about the naming. So the what's here called Open Census Agent could in theory also be called Open Telemetry
Collector agent?
Exporter or Collector Agent or Exporter. Yeah, I guess this is something
if you ask me, I think we should stick with the exporter because ultimately it implements the same sort of interfaces. So I would say some open telemetry exporter agent or collector, something like that.
Mhm.
So maybe for the web, we should simply call web exporter, which will basically push data to the collector.
No, it's rather collector exporter. If we have exporter Zipkin, exporter Jaeger, it should be exporter collector.
Probably, yeah. We can start with that, and we'll get some. I mean, enough time to revisit the names.
Mm.
Do you
But
agree?
I think the conclusion, conclusion is still the route should be to not directly go into Zipkin or Jaeger or somewhere else, but to use the collector as an endpoint here.
Does it sound correct, Bart? Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I'm just wondering if then we need to refactor the basic tracer or to split it or still use it, but then because we also need to explain this briefly for the people, right? Who will use it that in the web, you should not use the exporter Zipkin Eager.
I think, yeah, that's a documentation level issue. If we clearly mention in the document, then I think that might solve the issue. I know there might be still confusion after that, but that's the best we can do, I believe.
Okay.
I think you're still confused. I don't know.
No, I think it's more or less clear now. I know now that we have to basically create a new exporter for the web, which will be pushing data to some another collector.
Yes, that's right.
And the question is at the same time, if this is something we can, as we need this kind of exporter anyways, some like this format, the collector speaks, if we cannot create a collector exporter and reuse that somehow on the web, I'm not sure. And just use XHR then as transport, but the exporter format, like what it creates, the data structure would be the same, right?
Yeah.
Interface and everything, right?
Yeah, so now we are going back to my first idea that if we split the Zipkin and we treat the Zipkin as a exporter, and then we'll have another layer which will be this either collector or anything like this, then we might be able to have the Zipkin format and to either send this to some collector or anything like this that either will send data to the backend, or then you can use it in a node and ignore a collector or use something else, right? So
Yeah, but the
basically, the
collector has
exporter
its own.
maybe the exporter should not contain any transport layer then.
No, because the collector has its own format.
Okay.
So you cannot send Zipkin to the collector unless someone has the idea to create an endpoint for Zipkin. I have no idea. But from my understanding, the collector has this one endpoint. Where it expects data in this specific format, if
Yes,
I'm not mistaken.
that's right. The format is kind of really generic. So this should work with any kind of exporter. And the idea is to send, collector will accept traces in proto format, which is defined in the open census. And that will do the internal translation to the exporters. So it's more like very generic, and it should support most of the exporters. So, but are you thinking about adding this collector exporter sometime soon, or we should take this after the V2 or V3?
I mean, the next step after the document load is the zone scope manager, which I want to work, and then maybe it would make sense to create the exporter collector for the web to be finally able to see this data pushing somewhere.
Okay. And I hope meantime I'll ask Dev to join next meeting, so he'll give you more background about why we use this kind of architecture and all.
Okay.
What I know is there are some security concerns if you directly expose the exporters. The same thing Daniel mentioned, but I'm not really, I don't have like complete context to it, but something on that line I know. That's why we use this agent collector and all kind of stuff.
Yeah.
That's cool. So I think we are well over the time, 15 minutes more.
Cool. I just want to let you guys know too, I'm going to be out all next week rock climbing, so I'll try to get my stuff through by like next day or two.
Awesome. Enjoy.
Right.
Cool.
See you guys next week.
Cool. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.
See you.